For the headlines, the system of communication and information dissemination. The effect of Spanish colonization in the Philippine media. The American settlement and the revival of their newspaper to our country. United States granted the nation independence and the Philippine media quickly gained their reputation.
Ready to serve the Filipinos, raise your voice and let be heard. Carry the past to live the future, as one nation, as one vision. Ready to serve the Filipinos, raise your voice and let be heard. Carry the past to live the future, as one nation, as one vision. Ready to serve the Filipinos, raise your voice and let be heard. Carry the past to live the future, as one nation, as one vision. As one nation, as one vision.
Broadcasting live from the central outlet of Multimedia Network of Universidad de Manila. Brought to you by the Lubhasa TV, this is Envision Philippines.
As one nation, as one vision.
Together with truth and history.
Good day Philippines, good day Manila.
This is Envision Philippines, bringing you the top stories about the history of Philippine media. Let's begin our news with the Castle of History.
For the details of our news. Like the early ancestors of humankind, our ancestors developed a system of communication and information dissemination. When there is a system of oral communication, it follows that a system of written communication also existed. Here is Claire for more information.
In indigenous period, our forefathers established an information sharing method that our ancestors used. Oral communication system involves written communication systems.
Our historians taught us that the pre-colonial Philippines had a written language system. The most remarkable discovery is the ancient alphabet called Baybayin, which resembled our Asian neighbors' image-based letters. Ancient Filipinos used materials found in their environment to write down and record their experiences and transactions utilizing such a linguistic system. Oral traditions, literary compositions, including folk tales and epics, as well as family histories, were common in our emerging multi-language archipelago.
Aside from that, the Umalahocan or town crier was the closest thing to a broadcast system in ancient times. The town crier's main duty was to go around the barrio or small town and inform the citizens.
Historically, the Umalahocan was a person who resolved disputes within the barangay. When a dispute arose, the barangay heads or datu would call for special elections to pick an Umalahocan. When the argument was settled, the Umalahocan's term of office also ends. It's no surprise that today's media provides two conflicting viewpoints on a given issue.
Now with us is Miss Joyce Hanisa, a communication art student from Universidad de Manila. Miss Joyce, for you, as a communication art student, how important to have a background in the indigenous period of Philippine media and how does it affect our lives?
For me, as a communication art student, one of our duty is to deliver and spread accurate informations. And as a Filipino, it is just important for us to learn the truth about our history. Having an overview of the history or old-fashioned method of media as well as broad knowledge of it is extremely beneficial not only for me but also to my fellow students in this course. The study of media is critical because it aids us in comprehending the past, the present, and the future. We can foresee things by looking at how they happened in the past if we understand where the media is originated from.
Thank you for your wonderful statement, Miss Joyce. We hope that everyone, especially the youth, would pay attention in learning our history. Let us always remember that the indigenous period of Philippine media was very liturgical in the sense that it contains rich history. Bringing forth our country's goodness and magnificence is challenging, but the pleasure gives us the confidence to continue to live our history. Together with the Truth and History, Maria Claire Cruz from Envision, Philippines.
Thank you, Miss Claire. The Philippines' social, political, and cultural structures were altered as a result of colonization. The arrival of Ferdinand Magellan on Philippine coastlines in 1521 marked the beginning of Spaniards' 300-year colonization of the Philippines. For more information about the history of Philippine media during Spanish colonization period, let us hear it from John Arzel. John Arzel?
Yes, Edsel. In 1811, the first newspaper, Del Superior Gobierno, was founded with the goal of informing local Spaniards about events in Spain. To avoid being censored, periodicals dealt with history, science, religion, and other subjects in Spanish language and culture. The Philippine Free Press has its origin in nationalistic journals that sought to increase awareness of Filipinos' persecution at the hands of the Spaniards. These aristocratic journals, such as La Solidaridad, were founded by ilustrados, or what we call Filipino educated class, living in Europe, such as propagandist Graciano Lopez Haina, Marcelo H. del Pilar, and Jose Rizal. In 1892, the Katipunan, a Filipino nationalist group, was formed with the goal of separating the Philippines from Spain.
In 1896, the official newspaper, Kalayaan, was created with Emilio Jacinto as editor in order to strengthen and broaden the organization.
Although only one issue was printed, historians agreed that the Katipunan was a periodical that featured revolutionary Andres Bonifacio's two renowned poems,
Pag-ibig sa tinubuang bayan, ay ang dapat mabatid ng mga Tagalog.
Other newspapers widely used during the revolution were La Independencia, La Libertad, and El Heraldo de Iloilo. Fully understand the topic, let me introduce to you a Filipino media scholar, Mr. Sebastian Rafael Roselis. Good day, Mr. Roselis. So, Mr. Roselis, we all know that Spanish colonial period is very traumatized events that happen in our country since it lasts up to 300 years. My question is, despite of Spanish colonization, what are the positive events that happened in Philippine media during this era?
I must say that despite the fact that the written work produced during this era were written in Spanish as a tool to epitomize the Spaniards' powerful colonial rule over their colony. Still, this was the period that marked as the establishment or the foundation of press in our country, a press that we will someday call our own. Printing was introduced in the country and was spearheaded by the religious order. Also, the first printing press run by hand was introduced in the University of Santo Tomas. Doctrina Cristiana is the first print book printed in the Philippines by being chiseled on block of wood in 1593. After that, Successos Felices, also known as the Fortunate Events, and it was the first Philippine newsletter that reported about the battles won by the Spaniards. There was also Hojas Volantes, also called as the Flying Ship, La Esperanza, and Diario de Manila. After 38 years of existence, this was suppressed by a Spanish governor general for it allegedly incited Filipinos hate against Spaniards.
Thank you so much, Mr. Roselis. And that's the information we've gathered about history of Philippine media during Spanish colonization period. Together with Truth and History, John Argel Isit, for Envision, Philippines.
A pleasant day, everyone. I'm your Kuya Josh, sharing some trivia and facts about the history of Philippine media. Did you know that the first Philippine newspaper was established in 1811? It is the Del Superior Gobierno that was published here in the Philippines. It was intended for local Spaniards to satisfy their need for the latest developments in Spain and the rest of Europe. Also, it is our country's first newspaper to show in its layout the name, date, and place of its publication. For our second trivia, did you know that the Manila Times is the oldest English language newspaper that still exists in the Philippines? It was founded by Thomas Gowan on October 11, 1898. Shortly after news that the Treaty of Paris would be signed, ending the Spanish-American War and transferring the Philippines from Spanish to American sovereignty. Lastly, did you know that the first colored movie was Ibong Adarna? It is the first movie with color sequence, hand-painted, frame by frame, produced by LVN Pictures Incorporation, and it was directed by Vicente Salombides and released on October 17, 1941 in the Lisay Theater. And that's it for today. Again, this is your Kuya Josh, unlocking knowledge at the speed of thought, together with truth and history in Vision Philippines.
When the news is controlled and censored, the press is not free. When there is external interference and influence and the news is used to exploit, not explain, the press is not free. When journalists' access to information is prevented and questions are refused, the press is not free. When authority is not held accountable and justice is never served, the press is not free. When people's voices are silent, the truth is ignored, and the human stories that matter go untold and unheard, the press is not free. That is why free press matters.
We all know that the Americans conquered the Philippines. American settlement began during the Spanish colonial period and lasted up to 48 years. For the details, here is Miss Francesca to deliver the news.
Yes, Serge. It began with the cession of the Philippines in the U.S. by Spain in 1898 and lasted until the U.S. recognition of Philippines independence in 1946. The Americans who came by ship transportation brought with them their local products and their newspaper. On August 13, 1898, American newspaper came to our country. Soldiers had their own publications to look forward to read and during their spare time. Publications like Bounding Below and The American Soldier are the major paper for them. These papers contain most news from abroad and of the war. On their more subjective side, however, they also held a common and strongly predisposed view of the Philippines. These publications viewed the average Filipino as a non-thinking, perhaps non-human discrimination the Filipinos. To gather more information about this knowledgeable topic, we have here Miss Justiniano, a second-year college student. Hi, Miss Jack.
Hello.
What do you know about the situation in Philippine media during the American colonial period?
As we all know, American colonization began when they won the war against the Spaniards. During their colonization, the English language became the median instruction and the language used in new newspapers that came into the Philippines. But not everyone accepted it, so there are nationalist publications like El Renacimiento and El Nuevo Dia that were threatened of suspension for publishing the abuse of the American government. There is this also the newspaper called The Sakdal that published news against the American government, such as the abuse of the capitalists and landlords.
About the suspension that happened in those newspapers, are you aware of any law, Miss Justiniano? Like, do you have any idea what law is it, what is that for, and the purpose of it?
Yes. We also tackled about that, and there's this called the Sedition Law or Act 1692 of 1907, Section 8, which is intended for the purpose that Filipinos were forbidden to say anything against the American government because it is punishable by $2,000 and or imprisonment not exceeding 2 years.
Thank you for joining us and for sharing a very knowledgeable information, Mrs. Teñano. Indeed, it was a very history to achieve in having this freedom today in terms of media publications. Yes, there are some things that still close or block the way in delivering the truth, but we all know that at the end of the day, the truth will always find its way. Together with Truth and History, Francesca Lampa for Envision Philippines.
Thank you, Ms. Francesca. The pivotal role of the Philippine press in the nation's history is a point of pride among journalists. The newspaper La Solidaridad, published in Spain and distributed to intellectual reformers in the Philippines, was a mouthpiece for revolutionary sentiment against the Spaniards at the end of 19th century.
After the United States took control of the island from Spain in 1898, thwarting the drive for independence, the spread of the English language led to the establishment of a number of American-owned newspapers. They included the Manila Bulletin, which was founded in 1899 and still publishes today.
After the United States granted the nation's independence in 1946, the Philippine media quickly gained a reputation it still enjoys as the freest press in Asia. Weekly publications such as Philippine Free Press produced powerful pieces on social issues in a literary style that was immediate and impassioned.
A lot of things happened, especially when martial law came, when President Ferdinand Marcos imposed one-man rule in 1972. One of his first targets was the press. All radio, televisions, and newspapers were shut down, and the few that were allowed to reopen were placed in the hands of trusted cronies. Strict censorship was put in place. The best publications like the Free Press were shuttered and their publishers and editors were jailed for a time.
We have here live Mr. Romulo, a communication arts student, to share his insights about this topic. Mr. Romulo?
Good day, everyone. As we all know, here in the Philippines, press freedom has suffered more during the coronavirus pandemic. According to the Committee to Protect Journalists Global Impunity Index, the Philippines remains to be one of the worst countries when it comes to unsolved killings of journalists. The Philippines ranked 7th in the list of New York City-based media watchdog. With 13 unresolved killings in the last 10 years, it retained its position from a year earlier. For journalists, the commemoration of World Press Freedom Day every month of May is a call to remember why journalism must persist despite the growing risks and dangers of the profession. This celebration of World Press Freedom is also the reminder to government institutions around the world to uphold their commitment to ensure a free press in their respective countries.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rom. Up to this day, the battle for press freedom has always been a challenge for journalists here in the Philippines. Throughout history, journalists have sought to be the voice of the people, expose the wrongdoings of government, and serve as a watchdog against injustices.
Even after independence of Philippine press, there are still journalists who became victims of relentless attacks in pursuit of preventing them from informing the public of the truth. But as a media practitioner, we should always stand for what is right and what is true, and use our voices to make a change. And those are the top stories for this day. We hope everyone is doing great and in good condition. I am John Serge Magat.
And I am Edsel Joy Francisco. For everything that is really great and inspiring is created by the individual who can labor in freedom.
Together with truth and history as one nation, this is
Envision Philippines! Merry Christmas, everyone!